Hello, hello. Welcome to the Smarten Show. We are Darryl and Milena Weinberg. Say
Hi.
hello. And we are founders of School Pods Canada. You will find we do have a website as well, schoolpodscanada.com, as you will see there at the bottom of your screen. We are here live on lamnetwork.tv. So check out also the wonderful programmings on Lamb Network. And we do have a Facebook group, School Pods Canada, as well, where you can join the community and chat with us and see what's going on with the community. Here on the Smart Nap Show, we try to discuss anything to do with education, raising children, families, and anything related to that, remotely or not so.
And adults.
Well, families, hopefully included adults.
Well, we want to raise adults too.
Right. And you know what? We do find a lot of the times when you talk about education, educating children, we realize that in order for that to happen, the adults have to be the examples. And sometimes they have to receive education themselves to know how to be better examples and how to teach their children better.
Well, I think what you have, and it's certainly very intentional, the way that's been messaged over the past 30, 40 years or whatever, is the whole Peter Pan syndrome, is that people just don't want to grow up. I mean, you have a family member that
I do. And he admits it fully that he doesn't want to grow up. And he's declared he doesn't even want to have children because he doesn't want to be the cutest one. And I don't know, just doesn't want to grow up and be responsible.
He doesn't want to not be the cutest one.
or be responsible. And, and just some of the way our society, the messaging goes, it is true that it kind of creates that kind of thinking, which contrasts really what we believe our purpose is, which is to have families, to continue humankind and really have a healthy society.
Well, and you even look at the Toys R Us commercials from 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. You said the magic word, now look what you did, and all of a sudden you go back to whatever. So there's this intention.
There's messaging, for
absolutely,
sure, there.
And we even have a new word that has been added to the lexicon.
Oh, adulting.
Adulting.
Yes.
I mean, the first time I heard that, it was like, I'm not. You would see
adulting is not just something you choose to do; it's something you have to be. Like it's something you live. Right?
No, but you'll see memes on Facebook and stuff like that say, "I'm not adulting today."
I don't feel like it. Well, I don't feel like it every day, but we do have to do. Yeah. And with age comes certain responsibility, with all the gray hair that comes along.
Easy.
But it is just something that we should desire as society to contribute to as we gain experience, understanding, knowledge of things, experience. We should want to contribute and be responsible. I guess it's not easy and it's not fun, but it's something that just I think will make our lives more fulfilling. So, with all that introduction, we wanted to speak about today about making choices and how does the community, how do families come together to make education choices for their children, and how to create successful pods. If you are of the conviction that a public school is no longer serving you as a member of the public, and you're looking for alternative, there are options. But we're not only looking for what our rights and what our options are, we're looking for what our responsibilities in the whole process are. And how do we collaborate? I think if we don't have unity in the family, then we have lost the idea of how to have unity in the community, which is, I think, unity is part of both. Community is based on unity. And how do we achieve that? How do we create pods? How do we come together and make decisions together? A bunch of adults who have children. So, whether you want to accept it or not, you're an adult, especially once you have a child, that you you take on more responsibility.
Well, and the amazing thing is that even if you looked at 100 years ago, it was very common for teenagers to have kids. I mean, you would get married at 17, 18 years old. You would have kids by the
Absolutely.
time you were 19 or 20. And, by the time you hit 30 years old, you usually had a full family.
So, and it is interesting how, that did happen, because I know in my family, my great grandmother had the opportunity to actually get to know her, and because she had my grandmother in her teens.
Yep.
And then my grandmother had a child a little later. She was in her early 20, like she was 20, like late teens, early 20s. And my great grandmother had a joke when her daughter, my grandmother, was turning 80. And my great grandmother made a joke, well, you're getting old. Who's going to take care of me when you die? Kind of thing. Because
and your great grandmother was what, 98 at the time?
Well, yeah, she was, in her 90. Yeah. Well, obviously if she had 97, 98, if she had my grandmother at 17, 18 years old. So, it is funny thing, but it was actually a wonderful thing to be able to get to know the family. And I learned, I gained a lot. Actually, I gained the most important thing in my life because of my great grandmother. She's the one who had the time to sit me down and talk to me about spiritual things and about more eternal things versus, my grandmother was a young grandmother, so she was always busy. Now she taught me a lot of home skills and things like that. But every family member, every member of a community has a value to add to the education and the forming of the character of the children in the community. And so, and then I'm thinking, has anything biologically changed that we have children later? No, it's absolutely a social construct at what time we choose to have families and to grow up and be mature.
And fewer kids and the whole nine yards. So it's radically changed society. And one of the biggest components of that is the message that we're getting, that it's all about you and I have to pursue what I want, the whole women's lib movement, that women could gain careers
and do what makes you happy, and spend more time on things that make you happy. And sometimes you will be doing things that make you happy, but part of the process to get there is not happy process.
Well,
so we have to, and I understand the thought behind do things that give you joy, because we should. But we have to decide on focus and importance.
But being responsible and raising responsible members of society and creating a better environment for everybody is what should give us happiness.
Yes.
It's not just about fleeting pleasures. Yes. And the whole emphasis today is on pursuing pleasure. And again, you go back to one of the key verses of the Satanic Bible is do as thou wilt, that is the whole of the law. That was Aleister Crowley who actually quoted that, and then Anton LaVey put that in the Satanic Bible.
And now there's actually, what is it, Satan after school clubs?
And it's all about self-indulgence.
So it's kind of coming back into, like, in the open, this whole do what you want and kind of the satanic ideas.
But the problem with doing what you want is that it's usually at the expense of someone else.
Yes. And that's the thing. If we consider ourselves only, then we consider nobody else, because we won't have the opportunity to do so. And so therefore, we made, and the thing is, while we're busy pursuing our own happiness and without regard for others, then we'll be around a bunch of unhappy people, and then we won't end up being happy. You will not get out of life for yourself if you don't give first. And so that is kind of another background to what we are going to discuss today, because it is important to think how we're thinking, analyze our thinking, and see whether our thinking is beneficial to everyone around us, including ourselves, or just ourselves. But if our thinking is focused on ourselves only, then we will not be surrounded by people who enjoy being around us. So it's kind of what I call a catch-22 situation. Yeah. So we really need to prioritize things.
Well, humanity was designed to serve others. That's the way that God created things. And that we even have a lot of scriptures that point to that because of the fact that we have, the human nature is to pursue what we want.
Yes.
And I even had to have a conversation with our son about that this morning, that we don't just pursue what makes us, comfortable or happy at the moment.
Naturally selfish. Because we can see the world from our own perspective. So it's easy to get stuck in that perspective.
Well, but also what I want to do is what gratifies me at the moment.
Yeah.
But the long-term thinking and the delayed gratification is what's ultimately going to give us much greater satisfaction. It's the same thing that when human beings, because of the fallen world that we live in, we're designed to overcome. That is what gives us the most satisfaction. And the pursuit of something where it's hard, it's difficult. Look at athletes, for instance, and those are people that we applaud, and what they have to go through to get to the elite level. Who doesn't love watching a professional athlete operate at the highest level?
Yeah.
And
excellence.
Excellence, but this idea that you have to sacrifice. Olympics, for a 3-week period of time, athletes will train for 4 years between Olympics, but in order to get there, they have to train their whole lives.
Well, that's the thing, and they probably have given up some childhood time.
Oh my gosh.
So if they thought, well, this doesn't make me happy right now, I just want to go play with my friends, then we'll never get to the point of excellence and dedicate our lives to that.
And it has been shown through studies that in order to become an expert at anything, Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers quoted this study from the Netherlands, I think it was from back in about 1995, that said, in order for you to become an expert at anything, you have to put in 10,000 hours. And it doesn't matter whether it's sports, music, a trade, whatever discipline.
Skills.
So 10,000 hours is required in order for you to develop expertise at something. And 10,000 hours cannot be done overnight. You have to work at it.
And sometimes we look at people who are successful and we envy their success, but we do not. If we saw the process that took them to that point, we would not envy any of the steps that took the sacrifice
I have
to get there.
I have a great book on my shelf by Grant Cardone. It's called The 10X Rule. And the essence of the book is that in order for you to be more successful than anybody else in whatever your chosen field is, you have to be willing to do 10 times the work. And you have to pursue the goal with pit bull mentality that I will until, and it doesn't matter how many obstacles. And you listen to success stories. There's a podcast I was listening to a few weeks back, and it was all about the start of Airbnb and how they launched 3 different times and failed. And they just kept going at it, and they put everything on the line. They went and got jobs. Same thing with the band Kiss. When they were forming, they dropped their record label and contract because they didn't believe it was going to take them where they wanted to. And the guys were doing taxi jobs and everything else.
So
in order to pursue, and for years and years and years, nobody knew who they were, and they couldn't get a record deal. They could nothing until they finally had that one big break. And the same thing with the Airbnb guys. And this one guy who eventually started, he invested in them. He says, "You're like cockroaches. You just won't go away."
Right. And so in order for us to make things successful, yes, we have to dedicate ourselves, and we also have to develop this resilience. That's one of the qualities. But the other one is to really abandon the desire to have this instantaneous gratification, which is what being in screens and kind of like everything being automated has created in our children, and even in us, some of our generation as well. Even though it didn't grow up, it's easy to get accustomed to making things easy and come quick. And so
hard work is hard work, no matter how long you've been doing it.
Exactly. And so in order for us to be successful at anything, we have to make sure that we have a plan. And the reason actually I wanted to talk about how do we put school pods together, how does a community come together and make successful relationships, is because I was listening. It was completely unrelated, but to a lady teaching about decluttering and how to declutter your life and everything. And she said, do this one simple thing. She said, just clear off your fridge and keep that stuff off your fridge for 7 days and see how you feel for those 7 days. Because she said when she first did that, her instantaneous reaction, so I look like I'm moving, like it's not feeling cozy because all the objects that I enjoy on the fridge are not there right now. And it looks sterile. Like she had some words at first how she felt about it. And then 7 days later, she said, you know what? But it's not visually cluttering and taking, so I can focus when I get into the kitchen.
Yeah.
And then she said, further, once you start with that first step, she said, when people start, they want to declutter and organize their homes, they get overwhelmed and give up very easily because they want to start the biggest job right away without working their way up to it, without breaking things into smaller steps, more achievable steps. And so she has a career in advising people how to declutter, because she's figured out the art to breaking things down into simpler steps, defining things better, setting goals. And so this is why we, as the founders of School Pods Canada, we even had to go back to the drawing board and go, have conversations. Okay, how do we make this process more manageable? How do we make the steps simpler? How do we make it less overwhelming for ourselves as the organizers and the families who have to make all these choices about their education? Because I even developed this questionnaire when somebody would contact as a parent questionnaire and ask them what they want. And at first, because when it would be on the phone, I asked them what they wanted, they would be like, I don't know. So my questionnaire then started having options that people would choose from. Because, and as a teacher, I know that in Teachers College, I learned that one of the most intimidating things you can give a child is a blank page. Because, okay, write down what you think, and they would freeze, right? And so since then, I've learned to find work pages where they have boxes and little prompts and maybe pictures and things, just to get you thinking about something and just compartmentalize the steps and the things of the process that you're asked to do. And so, of course, we have those creative kids that will take a blank page and, the imagination will fill it out. But majority of us,
with a unicorn.
But a majority of us are not that way. Majority of us need help in the thinking process. And so that's why I wanted to today go over some considerations that need to come into play while we're putting pods together. And it's something that actually we'll be modifying on our website soon, which is frequently asked questions. We find that people often wonder about the same thing, because it's been many, many years. Now, in the United States, I know homeschooling has been popular and a big thing for many years. In Canada, we've had, because of our history, we have more trust into our government programs and what's kind of being offered to us. And we have had good, the government has taken good care of the people of Canada for a long time. But, decades ago, it started changing. And so, but what's happened is we as community, as society, have not had to make a lot of decisions about education, have not have to think, what are my options and alternatives? We know our kid turns certain age, we send them to school, and school starts at this time and finishes at this time, and this is when the breaks are, and it's predictable. And it's, you know what, we need to take that aspect of predictability and take it to School Pods where we're trying something completely new, and then set up our own pattern and predictability so that we can function this way. You
can't have a highly structured environment and all of a sudden remove that and say it's wide open, because everybody will just stand there like guppies and not know what to do.
And I have seen a lot of conversations in homeschool groups where parents are like, okay, my child's like 9-10 years old now, and they're still not reading because I'm waiting for my child to initiate the whole process. Well, and we've talked about the personality types. Some children will never initiate that process, especially if that's not their, the way their brain's wired. Like if they're not a language type of person, and if, which is combined with the personality that's not the highly motivated personality, they might never ask you, well, I want to read, and they will eventually, when you kind of get beyond the optimal age of learning, they'll eventually ask because they'll start feeling squeezed about the fact that they're lacking the skill. So now it's going to be out of necessity and out of pressure that they would want to learn something rather
And
than.
it's not going to be a pleasant experience. Whereas if you look at how we got our son started, I mean, we
But
were
he asked, but
no, but we
yeah,
were reading to him from the time from
we
the day he
exposed him to reading.
from the
Yes.
day he was born. We were reading to him. I mean, I would read Bible with him every night. He would be lying on the bed next to me, and
Yeah.
cat that was twice the size was over there. But he would,
Yeah.
I would be reading to him, and we would sit there and we would read books to him.
Yeah.
And when he was able to, he started mimicking the sounds and stuff like that. And so by the time that now he is very language oriented, his
Yeah.
brain is right
But
brained.
he is not the motivated type of personality. So, he had interest, but and there's the novelty, the initial interest he had. But then after a while, when he had to learn to write after he learned to read,
Yeah.
that's when we started having difficulty. He absolutely refused to write, even though he writes wonderfully in terms of he expresses himself well, but because of the motor skills that he needed to develop that he
Yeah.
had difficulty with, he struggled. So there needs to be some kind of plan of action of how are we going to take our children through their learning process and how are we going to encourage them and create something for them that's going to take them from one stage to learning to the next while creating predictability, while creating some kind of stability for them in terms of knowing what to expect. Obviously, that doesn't, some people that sounds boring. Well, you can always make it a fun experience, but when they know the parameters they're working within, they will thrive. And so I want to start with pods, the word pods, because that's a fairly new buzzword. I mean, it really got big around COVID, 2020, when schools shut down. There was no
Yep.
school. And so parents all of a sudden were like, what do I do with my kids?
Yeah.
We haven't had to make choices about school. We haven't had to educate our children. We haven't, the homeschoolers were fine because they just kept on homeschooling. You at home. You've
As,
always been home.
as you were.
Now, it did change because we did homeschool before COVID. It did change because now you couldn't see your friends. So now even homeschoolers had to adapt to
Mm-hmm.
this new environment. So that's when pods really became famous. And my big thing is I've actually always looked in different modes of education. And now pods that really started way before COVID in Hollywood, where famous movie stars or whoever lives in Hollywood wanted their children to receive good education. But because their parents were famous, they would be treated differently in school.
Mm-hmm.
So they did not want that to happen. And they also wanted their children to socialize because it's a lonely life of a famous family, despite the fact that everybody, knows them. Just having those intimate relationships is difficult when you are kind of in the spotlight all the time. And it's difficult to develop private life. So,
Yeah.
what are pods? So pods are, I guess, groups in a homeschool environment that may or may not try to replicate school environment. But pods are also the creation of a community that has chosen not to participate in the available public education system, but to create their own homeschool program, to create their own path of education that is not necessarily available for them at this point,
Yeah.
whether in the private or the public sector of education.
Mm-hmm.
So pods essentially a homeschool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Where groups come together and they kind of create some kind of education learning environment for the kids. A lot of homeschoolers will tell you, the kids don't want to get out of their pajamas. They keep going to the fridge to snack and things like that. So some days parents wish that there was a little bit more of a distinction between the comfort of home and so those homeschool pods could be an opportunity for that.
It's also an issue people have with working from home. And,
Yeah.
the people that never, I mean, you and I have been working from home for as long as we can remember. But when COVID kind of forced everybody to start working from home, there was a lot of people who never got out of their pajamas and bunny slippers.
And mental health issues started popping up because, like you said earlier, we are meant to achieve and overcome. And when we are home doing nothing, we kind of didn't feel very productive and very valuable. And when we had to stay home, the government gave us some kind of money to keep buying groceries and keep existing. But
that they then demanded back.
Well, that's a different show. But what happens is we like to feel productive. We like to have routines. We like to socialize. That was one of the hard things. Also during that time we were all locked up, and so parents started thinking we need to do something for our children. And that's when I started receiving phone calls, because I was already a homeschooler and I was already a tutor. So I started getting phone calls. Okay, can you help us, put a group together? What also happens in pods is curriculum is decided based on the objective of education. Okay, so that's where the families that come together with the teacher, the groups that come together, they can decide what the emphasis of their education to be. Pods are created for the purpose of education. They're social pods that are created for the purpose of socializing. But because we have talked several shows ago about the fact that there's an age at which the children's brains growing so fast that every experience is a learning experience. We want to optimize that social experience with learning.
Yeah.
So pods kind of combine that. And some parents go into pods because they want to, the children are not thriving in the education system. They want to pull them away, but they also want the children to be ready to enter back into the education system if they decide to change their mind. And that was one of the beauties when we started homeschooling, was the fact that I had choices. And so I was a public school teacher. Our son went to public school. Then we homeschooled, but then he went to Christian school where I taught as well. And we've transitioned back and forth in different options. And that's the beauty. But what you want to achieve with pods is to make sure that your children are learning academically and kind of the skills that will help them transition easily, socially as well, how to function with a new environment, different groups.
Yeah.
So that's pods also provide the opportunity for families that feel strongly about, let's say, homesteading or technology or handcrafts and things like that. If and we were talking earlier about the fact that if a pod happens to be in a community where there's farmers, well, probably the pod will be more like a farm focused skill pod with some academics put into that. And I know there are farm schools out there. They do some academic time and then they spend a lot of the day practicing farm skills. It's similar with forest schools as well. There's some academic aspect, but usually it's more like wilderness, outdoor skills. And
count the number of deer you see.
Well, I mean, and you can do learning anywhere you want. That's true. But what pods create also is a bit of a
more
algebra
in the forest.
It's more systematic way. You want to do a little bit more systematic way of how learning is going to happen as well. So really when you want, so I can't give you a definition of what pods are. They're just learning groups of families, like-minded families who really have similar objective and want to raise their children in a similar way, values. They're like-minded people who come together and they hire people, they hire teachers sometimes to help them, or they can a pod that is more like a co-op pod where the parents can teach the children, especially if you have a teacher amongst those parents. We can definitely utilize each other. But if for some reason a pod decides to hire a teacher, that is also a wonderful experience depending on what we are looking to achieve. So really the question is, when you think about pods, is what will be the responsibility of the teacher that is being hired? What is the responsibility of the parents? So pods are really collaboration between parents and teachers. The reason we do not want to follow the public school system because we don't want somebody else to be in charge of our children's learning, and we passively give our children to that institution. We want to be more a part of that decision-making process.
However, that requires work. It requires effort,
Yeah.
it requires sacrifice. And, to be engaged in anything. And what we find today is that because number one, things are hard in general. You've got a
Life's
lot
hard.
of life's hard, but
Just
it's harder than it's ever been because
yeah.
you've got all these different stresses. You've got prices going up. You've got people losing their jobs. We got the entire world that's breaking out into war, all over the place.
There's more technology. There's all kinds of stuff happening in
And
the
so it's
world. Yeah.
easier, and I find that's something that even I have to wrestle with, that you just kind of you want to check out because there's just so much to deal
It's
with.
overwhelming.
It is
Absolutely.
overwhelming. And but then you've got this whole situation where, well, now what was something that I could just kind of hand off, now I've got to be engaged, and that means I've got to be mentally engaged, and people are exhausted.
Well, and a lot of parents, so that's another thing I have to think about, but the thing is, we have to prioritize. What do we think about? What is the most important thing to think about? And if it's not our children, it's not our families, I can't think of anything else that's more important. So definitely.
Well, it goes back to that event that we were at a couple months ago, where the university professor said, "You are already going to sacrifice when it comes to your kids' education, one way or another. The question is, what's it going to be? Are you going to sacrifice time or money, or are you going to sacrifice your children? Because it's going to be one or the other."
Actually, our neighbor has put a sign. A neighbor here who's obviously like-minded to us,
Yep.
and she has put up a sign, and it essentially says something that if you choose to be silent and to be passive at this time, you may make your life easier, so you're not fighting, but then your children's life is not going to be any easier. So if we choose as parents to do the easy thing now, then our children's lives will not be easier. So we need to set them up for success and start. Often in pods, the big question is, well, who's going to teach things like spirituality, sexuality, home ec skills, survival skills, homesteading, all that stuff? How much of that is being taught at home? How much do we want as a community of like-minded people to teach together? And if we have parents who know how to do it, that's fine. But if none of the parents in the group that wants to learn these skills, then somebody has to be either to be asked to volunteer, or maybe to be compensated for their time to teach those skills.
Yeah.
And so what would be the responsibility of the parents? Now, this is something parents need to ask themselves. What am I going to be responsible when it comes to my child's education?
Yeah.
And sometimes if you entrust the experts, then you have to provide some kind of compensation for them, right? So I, as a parent, either provide the funding or I provide the time that it takes to put a program together for my child.
Yeah.
How are pods grouped together? Like, how do we decide what kids go together? And you and I have talked about the fact that the pods are kind of like fashioned around one classroom schoolhouse.
Yeah.
But nowadays, because I think with all the education systems and things like that, with complicated things, our kids could, they're so used to being divided by grades, right?
Yeah.
Now in pods, what parents, especially if the objective is to socialize, then parents might prefer to put the kids together by age. But pods could also be put together by ability level, because sometimes, especially around COVID, what happened is different kids in the same age group, they learn different things. Some of them learn more language, move forward in language, but math was stuck, or the other way around. And so when you put kids together by age, you will still have ability levels. Sometimes pods can be put together by ability level. So a teacher could say, I'm going to teach this grade, this grade. Well, the kids don't necessarily have to be the same age, but their ability level might be at that.
Yeah.
And so, but whatever it is, pods have to have the flexibility to cater to those things. And so if you put kids together by age or grade, then you have to have a teacher that you hire has to be familiar with IEP, individual education plans, for each child that has to have their own kind of path of learning, because they all start at a different skill level. And so you have to have a flexible teacher who's familiar with these things. And that's why I advise that and at School Pods Canada, we ask teachers to come and teach the kids. We hire them because it is quite a feat. And I even seen homeschool questions where moms that have different age kids at home, they're like, I don't know what to do. My toddler's all over the place, and my older kid needs a little bit more of my time, and then the little one, there's just all this stuff going on. And so if we put pods together where a teacher comes in, they are already being taught how to individualize learning within the same grade with the same class. Um, and so that teacher will get to know the children and develop a plan for them while they're still. And so in pods, a teacher could teach to the middle, but I don't think that serves anyone, because the ones that are at a higher level, they're not stimulated as much, and the ones, at the lower level could get lost. So though kids will be doing um, you know, group lessons and group activities together, there has to be a part of the pod where there's an individual learning, where they follow their individual learning path. Um, but ultimately, when pods come together, see, this is why here at School Pods Canada, we cannot advise you exactly how it's going to go, because we don't know what group's going to come together, the dynamics of the kids, the personalities, the ability levels, all of that has to be taken in consideration for decisions for the pod to be made, how learning is going to take place.
And it also depends on the preferred style of curriculum too. I mean, there's many
Absolutely.
different models for that.
Yes.
And I mean, you can have a classical one, you can have Charlotte Mason, you can have Waldorf, you can have Montessori. I mean, so
Yes.
there's all of these different philosophies. And then you have to decide, well, is it going to be a Christian pod? Do we have all believers or mostly believers? Or are we going to have more of a non-spiritual one where we don't really have an emphasis on biblical things?
Yeah.
Although, that being said, we also refuse to allow anything that's unbiblical to be taught.
Well, what has been a dividing factor in public schools has been the whole sex ed, and the whole
And
gender
critical race.
and critical race. So anything racial or sexual, we at School Pods Canada say that that's something that the parents are responsible for. So we want to stay away from that.
Oh yeah.
And the religious aspect as well. I honestly prefer to teach kids about the different beliefs there are, and to say, I believe in the Bible and what the Bible says, and that's what it says. But you are free to explore, because God has given us free will. You're free to explore with your family. So this is where I do not come against the family, but I still have the right to express what I believe, because children learn from the different people in their lives that believe different things. I think that is actually the beauty of that, but that cannot be the emphasis of the pod. That is just a side note of how children are to learn, but that's so. So we have to decide what's best for the group, and what the goals of the group are. So siblings in the same family could be in the same pod, because obviously a pod accommodates several different levels and ages. Of course, we at School Pods Canada do not recommend that there's too big of an age gap, because it's just the interests of the children are so different at different stages of their development. And so, and pods, another thing is, we have found that the best number of children learning together is between 5 and 10 kids. If you go lower than that, it's not as much fun, because there's not as much interaction. And if you go beyond that, higher than that number, then it becomes confusing, and it's harder if a teacher has to develop those individual learning paths for the students, then it's going to be difficult for that teacher to handle more than 10 kids in one, unless they have an assistant, and that's another option in a pod, that they're an assistant. They could be a parent volunteer or somebody else to assist, or maybe a high school student who would like to pursue career
and so that's something that the pod itself would have to come together on and agree as to how they're going to do the recruitment, whether there's going to be any kind of remuneration for that. So that's why, the beauty with pods is that there's no real limitations on how they go, but you have to define what that is ahead of time.
Yes. And so that's why we insist that families get together. Some people just want to call up and sign up and, bring the kid to a pod. No, you
Like,
have to be part.
that's what they did with the school system, and that's
Yeah.
why it's broken now.
Yeah. Like people often ask us, and I'm just going to address this right now. They ask us, is there a pod already running in my area? Well, even if there is one, how do you know that that's the right pod for your child, especially if they're so individual and they give you the opportunity now to modify them? You have to really look at what kind of pods are there in my area.
And one of
Yeah.
the other aspects of it is, do we want that particular family in the pod? Because
It's a mutual thing.
I
Absolutely.
mean, if you're a parent who tends to be more involved, and I'm using this word very kindly, in what your child does, because the first one that you taught a few years ago, you ran into that issues where it was one parent who dominated the whole thing, and it
Well,
ended up alienating everybody else because of it.
but it was also the other parents weren't ready to make decisions and sit down with that parent. So that parent got frustrated and started doing the
Right.
decisions for everybody else. That parent didn't intend to do that at the beginning, but it's just that when people were not involved in this, and that's why we talk to you as a parents. If you want a pod, you have to be involved in the decision making process. And I have heard some parents say that's a lot of work. Yes, raising children is a lot of work, period. And their education is one of the most important decisions you're going to make. So, yes,
And
it is.
and for thousands of years before public education became a thing, which really started in the late 1800s,
Yes.
it was the responsibility of parents to teach their children.
Children were learning at home. Actually, homeschooling was the norm.
Yeah,
How things have
yeah.
changed, but
And public education wasn't necessarily a bad thing as long as the right values were being promoted, and it helped systematize, and it gave everybody access to the same thing. And so, society really advanced. But then, of course, you had the forces of evil that moved in, took over, and now we have a complete deconstruction of society based on, I mean, just look what's going on in the universities today. Could you have possibly imagined, even 2 years ago, that we'd be facing this, and that you have outright hostility and physical attacks against Jewish students at universities in, like, New York and California?
and that's where diversity was supposed to be embraced and all that. So yeah, no, things have gone opposite of what it was
And
said
and
it's
why is
supposed to
this?
do.
Because the Marxists have made sure their teachers are in there. You've got the Middle Eastern countries, as well as George Soros, who is funding the university to the tune of billion. Do you know Qatar last year gave over $3 billion to Ivy League universities?
Well, but this is why we're sitting here talking to parents about the fact that if the public school system is no longer serving you, no longer representing your
No, that's not
values.
even public. Universities are not public. They're paying tens and hundreds of
Well,
thousands of
it's true.
dollars.
Well, it's post-secondary though, because after your public education, that's where you go.
Right.
So what I am talking about though is that we as parents have to start learning how to make decisions so we can model to our children to
So
make those decisions, because when they go into these institutions, they don't feel like they have choices not to participate in these
yeah.
things.
And so what we have to do is we have to go back to the way it was before, 150 years ago, where
Yes.
parents were the primary person responsible for their children's education.
Yeah. So yes, so these are decisions that have to be made. Yes, absolutely. It would be wonderful if there's a pod in your area already that is existing and it's kind of matching what you're looking for or works for your child.
That's called winning the lottery.
But yes, and especially in Canada right now, these are fairly new things, and they're popping up everywhere. But a lot of them are closing quickly. So the reason we started School Pods Canada, because we want to create a lasting place for children to learn, for that to be your education solution for years to come, not just try it out for a year.
Yeah.
And so in a school pod, the teacher is able to communicate about the progresses and the challenges of the children. So they set goals together. Okay, so we're going to work harder on this, and so and then the lessons have a flow to them. They have kind of structure. So children like to have structure and routine as
Hmm.
well. Yes, pods could be fun and they could be surprising activities and things like that happening in there. But if children have that routine to their life, that eliminates the unpredictability of everything else that's going on in our lives.
Yeah.
So that is kind of what pods are, what they do. And then the next thing I wanted to talk about, finding a teacher. So we need to define what kind of teacher to find by what role do we want them to play. Do we want that teacher to be a tutor? So you as family have decided your family's personal preference of curriculum, and then that teacher makes sure that they're meeting the expectations of that curriculum. And so are they assisting you, which is not the preference for us for school pods, but that's an option, that the parents provide the curriculum and then the tutor kind of teaches to that curriculum. Um, so sometimes to save money, that's what parents would do, because when it comes to hiring a teacher that we want to develop a custom program for our children, they will be spending more time and resources. So we have to be willing to pay more money for that kind of
Hmm.
thing. Now, I wrote down something about why people choose to join a pod or school, and the number, and that comes from parents being interviewed on that topic. And one is because it's the personalized learning. I think we've all figured out that the public education is no longer able to address the diversity of needs in the student population, and they're cutting down on budget in terms of additional resources and support staff as
Yeah.
well. So that is kind of diminishing. So the personalized learning is number one. Um, a lot of people join pods because they can't afford private school. Now, the thing is, we have been able to cut down the prices by not having a building. So it takes place in a home or a public area that is not too expensive. But pods are better alternative. It's like a school, but it's not as expensive as a private school. Some people are saving money by doing that. Um, Pods are usually a better place to accommodate special needs because of the flexibility in schedule and things like that, the level of participation of the child. Better friendships. A lot of parents feel that better friendships are developed in smaller groups, especially with the issue of violence and bullying and the larger schools. Um, some parents choose play-based learning and experiential learning. So depending on what the pod is why parents choose to be there. Um, so one note here is homeschooling doesn't have to look like school, and it doesn't have to take place at home either. And that's the thing the government's trying to tell us, oh, well, homeschooling is only if a parent teaches their biological children. Well, but when co-ops come together, the parents can exchange teaching to each
Hmm.
other, or they can hire a teacher if they value the expertise of their teacher, their experience, and what they can do for their children. Because sometimes children do have special needs, and just like in a school, they need accommodations. At home, the parents are not able to cater to those needs, and so
Hmm.
they need a professional to help. So school pods can help with all that. School pods can now learning pods, like general learning pods, um families, if it's for social purposes, you can just meet once a week for 3 to a couple of hours, right?
Yeah.
Which is, you don't need to hire anybody for that, you just get together. But if we want to follow more of a comprehensive program, then school pods, we recommend they meet anywhere from 3 to 5 days a week, and it's a full day. But what we could do is we can hire the teacher for a certain amount of time, and then the parents can make sure that they enrich those experiences as well. um One thing also that has to do with finding a teacher and tutor, and I've just kind of been following different experts on that, but there's three factors we have to consider. So how much we pay a teacher depends on these three things. What are the teacher's credentials
Hmm.
and experience? Um, what commitment do we require of them?
Hmm.
And how are we going to handle the curriculum, the whole curriculum aspect? So here's when it comes to credentials. So do we want somebody who is a certified teacher? Do we want somebody who's experienced teachers? Do we want teacher even with master's degree? Like you can have different levels of qualifications. Or if we want to save money, then we going to have to be willing to hire somebody who's not quite as experienced, is not quite um, as I guess educated on the different techniques of teaching our kids. So it really, again, it goes back to setting up a goal when forming the pod to begin with before we define what we want in a teacher.
Hmm.
The commitment. So the commitment of the teachers, how many hours and how long of a period of time do we ask? So here at School Pods Canada, we recommend that families and teacher commit to each other for 1 semester. You know, the best thing is for the whole school year to give continuity, but because it's a new thing, we've said, okay, for a semester, for let's say September to January,
Hmm.
and then after January to June will be the second part of the commitment.
Right.
How many hours a day, how many days a week? Those are things. Um, so you know that if you, and this is one thing, like if you hire a tutor, I mean, you would be paying more money because it's just a sporadic hours here and there. But if it's a commitment, then that teacher can give you a bit more of a discount on an hourly basis so that you give them more hours of work and the payment.
Right.
Also, the curriculum, if the teacher is going to create custom curriculum, that will cost a little bit more because resources are going to be needed and time versus if you as the parent provide the curriculum and that teacher just follows that and their time commitment is not as much. And again, we can, if you want to talk to us, we'll talk about reasonable rates for pay, but they could be quite variable because of those different factors. But really, what I wanted to talk about next is some things that parents who want to join a pod have to be willing to make decisions on and to compromise at the same time. Because remember, when a pod comes together, what the pod does and what the teacher does with the pod will be what's best for the group. Okay, this is where the individual has to learn to work with the other individuals. And listen, the teacher will not ignore your child's individual needs. They will have the individual plan, but how the pod runs will, because there are different factors. There's the discipline that's in the pod. There's how children learn in the pod, what the modes of learning that they prefer, and things like that. A teacher has to make these decisions. So while the teacher's making these decisions, you as parents have to be able to make the following decisions. Anything you want to add before I?
No, and we're just coming to the end of So
So can I just make the quick list of what you may be willing to make decisions on? Because I was going to read that list, or should we leave that for another show?
I think that list is probably something that we could do an entirely different show on as we begin to expand on it.
Okay. Well, it sounds good because yes, and we do, and I think the reason we wanted to talk about this because at this time it's now we get near like at the end of the school year, and parents are already starting to think, well, what am I going to do the next school year? Because schools are starting to ask, is your child coming back to school, and what school they're going to attend, and all that. So we will then continue in our next show speaking about what kind of decisions need to be made about a pod. So this show was more like general what pods are, what things could be part of a pod. And in the next show, then we will chat about checklist of things to decide to make your pod work for you.
Right. And so, listen, if you want us to help you put a pod together, or you want to have more discussions on what this looks like, or if you're interested in maybe helping us develop a network of pods, listen, we want to talk to you because our primary concern with pods is the rescue of the children. This is what this is all about.
We want to talk to parents. We want to talk to teachers. We want to talk to grandparents. We want to talk to anyone in the community who's willing to contribute in some way because they care about children having an opportunity to learn
Right.
without the pressures.
Okay. So we'll continue this discussion next week, and we look forward to hearing from you, any comments that you might have. And again, our responsibility is to train children up in the way that they should go. And we're just going to have to roll up our sleeves and get busy with this. And it's going to be hard, but you know what? The outcome will be worth it. So on that note, we bid everybody a great week, and we'll see you soon right here on lamnetwork.tv for the Smarten Up Show. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.